Unit 3, Research Methods. Presentation 1, Introducing Experiments.
The key feature of an experiment is that it demonstrates cause and effect relationships. It does this by having an independent variable that is controlled by the researcher in order to observe its effects on the dependent variable. Let's think of an experiment. A psychologist interested in eyewitness testimony might wish to investigate whether anxiety has an effect on the accuracy of recall. That is going to be the aim of our study. There are two variables in this study, anxiety and recall. Which of these two variables is the independent variable?
Is it anxiety?
Yes. We want to find out whether anxiety affects the dependent variable, which is recall. Which brings us to the next step in designing this study. We need to operationalize our variables. Operationalization means that you define a variable in a way that it can be experienced or measured. In our study, in order to operationalize the variables, we need to work out how we are going to create anxiety and how we will measure recall. First, we need to operationalize the independent variable. We could do this by making the participants physiologically aroused, because this is an effect associated with anxiety. Our heart starts beating faster and breathing becomes more rapid and so on. So being physiologically aroused is similar to feeling anxious. A way to do this is to get them to run on the spot. The next decision we need to make is about operationalizing the dependent variable. How do you think we might measure this?
We could show people a series of pictures and then ask them questions about the pictures to see how accurate their recall is. So then you would have an accuracy score for each participant.
This brings us to the hypothesis. An experimental hypothesis is a statement about what we expect to be true, a statement about the expected relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. A hypothesis is a testable statement rather than a proposition about the topic you're interested in.
What about anxiety has an effect on the accuracy of recall?
That's a hypothesis, all right, but not completely right because you haven't stated it in a way that can be tested. For this, you need to include the operationalized variables.
And these were running on the spot and a test of recall of pictures.
So, the fully correct hypothesis would be participants who run on the spot while looking at some pictures get lower scores on a test of recall of the pictures than participants who stand still. Now, you might notice two things about this hypothesis. First, there are two forms of the independent variable: participants who run on the spot and participants who stand still. We have to do this so that we can compare the results and then decide if the independent variable of anxiety did or didn't affect recall.
I think I've got that. The two levels of the independent variable are running on the spot, which creates arousal, and standing still, which is no arousal.
These levels of the independent variable are also called conditions. So there is an experimental condition, which is running, and a control condition where there is no running. The second thing to notice in the hypothesis is that it states the direction of the difference that is expected. It states that people in the arousal condition will recall more than people in the control condition. What we could have done was to predict no direction. For example, participants who run on the spot while looking at some pictures get different scores on a test of recall than participants who stand still. This kind of hypothesis is called non-directional because it doesn't state which direction the results will go in. The other kind of hypothesis is a directional one. Just one tiny thing to add. Not all experiments have a control condition. In the hypothesis we just looked at, the independent variable is the time when the test was taken, and the two levels of the independent variable are morning and afternoon. There isn't a control condition.
So in the arousal study, you could have one condition with a little bit of anxiety and one with more anxiety, instead of having one condition with anxiety and a condition with no anxiety.
Exactly.